Cotton.
Thank you all for coming on this important topic. You know, we have a hearing like this in public on this committee in part to inform the public of the scale of the threat. And sometimes when we do that, people are kind of shocked to learn about it for the first time. But there's nothing new here, right? This subterfuge, deception, influence, espionage has been a part of Chinese statecraft going back at least to Sun Tzu. Is that correct? Dr. Tiffert?
The United Front has been present for, it's been, actually Lenin is the one who gave the first name to it. And it was a strategy by which the Bolsheviks were this tiny minority party that suddenly were in a position to rule the entire Soviet Union. It worked. The Chinese said, wow, okay, let's copy that. Let's improve upon it. What has changed, I think, is the scale, the intensity, and also the levers that China has more recently, simply because it's a more powerful country that has many more resources that it can devote to this. And so the United States is, what might have worked 15 years ago to resist Chinese influence is no longer working.
And I'm glad you mentioned Russia, because whether in its Soviet form or Tsarist form or now in its Putinist form, they've used the same tools always, whether it's trying to influence how the West perceives Vladimir Putin's unprovoked war in Ukraine, or the nuclear freeze movement in 1982 or 1983, or the origins of the world wars, or so on and so forth. The difference with China, especially relative to Russia, is those levers you talk about, right? It has an almost unlimited number of levers because of its deep entanglement in American society and economy, whereas Soviet Russia was more or less sealed off from the West. As you're all nodding your head, that's correct. Let me just give you like one example of how this could happen. Let's say you have a boarding school, and 30 or 40 years ago, the boarding school was populated mostly by students, say 7th through 12th grade, from within a 300 to 500 mile drive. And now today it's predominantly populated by Chinese nationals, students who are here on visas. That boarding school and its local government and its local chamber of commerce and its local economic development commission has in some ways become a de facto tool of Chinese influence, has it not? Dr. Tiffert?
I think we need to deal with this extremely carefully. We need to be attentive to where the risk is and develop the capacity to detect it. But at the same time, particularly under Xi Jinping, there's a very large segment of Chinese society that is unhappy with the direction their country is moving in. That really sees this is an opportunity for the United States to reach out to them, not only because it's the right thing to do, but if you're thinking in geopolitical competitive terms, these are individuals who have a tremendous amount to contribute to American society, and we need to remain open to that.
I agree with that, and I'm very sympathetic to the fact that the Chinese people are the first and the worst victims of Chinese communism. I also have my doubts that many people who are allowed to leave China are not somehow either an arm of the PLA or the CCP, or for that matter, still under the influence of them because their family members stay there. But it's one thing to go back to my analogy for that headmaster or the board or the local chamber of commerce to come up here and lobby Senator Collins, Senator Cotton, and Senator Cornyn on student visas, something that's directly influencing them. But we also get people in those settings who come up here and lobby on things that have nothing to do with their immediate interests, like asking us to quiet down about the genocide of Uyghurs or the oppression of Hong Kong. It's kind of like the example Senator Rubio raised, right? With Daryl Morey, the former GM of the Houston Rockets. They weren't talking about market access for NBA television rights in China. They were talking about China's oppression of Hong Kong. So it's this secondary leverage that the Chinese Communist Party gets because of our economic entanglement. Ms. Cook, you're nodding your head vigorously.
Yes, I mean, I think that's one side of it. I would just add to what Dr. Tiffert was saying is I think part of it is there's an opportunity, but there is just a changing circumstance where our schools, we haven't taken as much advantage of the fact that you have young Chinese people coming here. And I've had conversations with students, and we've had, that are very upset at the Chinese Communist Party, and in some cases have the family who have experienced persecution in China, and that's one reason why they wanted to come and flee it in the United States. And I think some of what happens at that local level is this lack of preparedness, both in terms of responding if you get a request or how do you deal with this, now you're asked to do this geopolitical thing, but also how do we best prepare and protect and inform these Chinese students what are their rights under U.S. law when they're here. If they get a call from the consulate, who can they turn to if they're being intimidated or things like that? Because a lot of times they don't have that knowledge or resources as well.
Well, and I just wanted to use that one example. There are many other examples, like it could be a small privately held manufacturer who gets a key input from China. It's one thing for someone like that to come lobby all of us or members of the House of Representatives on tariff rates and trying to get an exemption for their critical input from China. It's another thing for them to come up here and lobby us on the genocide of the Uyghurs or the persecution of Christians. My point is that there are almost innumerable points of leverage that China has created that we need to educate the public about. And when they come up here and act as de facto arms of the Chinese Communist Party.